Thank you, everyone, for joining this tech chat. My name is Ariella Shoham. I'm Aidoc's VP of Marketing, and I'm very, very excited to get this fireside chat going with Nina Kottler, who I don't think I have to introduce, Associate Chief Medical Officer at Rad Partners, and our CEO, Elad Walach. This is a Zoom session. It's not a webinar, but I have muted you all. The plan is to have a 30-minute fireside chat, no slides, maybe some slides will come up towards sort of as we move forward. So for any questions, we're going to leave 15 minutes at the end. And if you do want to ask something, then please use the chat. I'm going to moderate in the background just to let Elad and Nina progress with the flow. So no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, Elad, to kick this off with Nina. I'm going to get off camera, stop sharing. So looking forward to a great session with both of you. Thanks very much.
Perfect. Thanks, Ariella. So Nina, as always, exciting to chat with you. And I think I'm really excited about the topic of today, talking a bit about the broader picture of AI. And I think that the trend that we're seeing is that I would say AI is becoming more of a is becoming more part of standard of care. But the real question is, how do radiologists take a role with AI, and how does it position the radiologist potentially differently within the organization and when thinking about AI? So I want to start maybe with one question that I know you're very passionate about, your topic you're passionate about, which is the business case for AI. Because I think one of the most important elements for radiologists is to learn how to tie, yes, we're implementing AI, yes, it can potentially improve quality and efficiency, but how does it change the bigger picture? So as one of the leading speakers on the topic, would love to hear your thoughts about where do you see the AI potential to provide business value?
Great. Well, thank you first for having me. And it always is great to catch up with you, Elad. And I do want to answer the other question at some point too, which you mentioned, how can physicians partake in AI? But let's start with a business case, because if you don't have a business case, you're not going to have AI. Right? It's not like we have extra dollars just sitting around in healthcare waiting to be spent. We don't. And so we need to make sure that whatever AI algorithm model that we are deploying has a proven business case. And what do I mean by that? I mean that it has to drive value. And it's not just the value of, hey, you're getting something for free. Do you want to keep it? Because we ask our practice that sometimes too. And they're like, yeah, it's great. But then when you say, well, do you want to pay for it? They're like, oh, no. It has to be a much higher bar when you're paying for something. So the value has to be there. And value is in the eye of the beholder. I'd like to say, first of all, being a clinician, the first thing that we're thinking about when it comes to value, or the quadruple aim, is the patient. And are we improving outcomes? But we do have to recognize realistically that improved quality, improved outcomes is an expectation of part of our service. And if we're not providing that, then that's a deficiency of our service and not something extra to pay for. Now we're starting to see a little bit of change in that, where Medicare, through their NTAP, their new technology add-on payment, and perhaps through the Medicare coverage of innovative technology, the MCIT program, we're starting to see Medicare actually putting dollars toward improved outcomes. And I think it will get us there. And as we start transitioning from fee per service to fee for value, then we'll be able to see a better business case for AI, because there is absolutely a value in the utilization of AI. But without that improved quality, improved outcomes, we're not even going to consider utilizing a solution. So I think right now, where we are in that abyss, where we're not quite fully at fee for value, we're still a lot at fee for service, and we have to manage both ends of that spectrum. We have to think about what is the financial value that is gleaned, and values in the eye of the beholder. So it really depends on what stakeholder you're talking about. So if you're talking to me in a radiology practice, and I have to say, the first group that ever talked to me in my practice about what is their ROI, and this was many, many years ago, they said, well, we're going to replace radiologists. And that's how you're going to save money. And I'm like, we're a radiology practice. Do you know who you're actually speaking to? And so I think that's evolved, and it's evolved in a really good way. I think when people are talking to radiology practices now, what pays the bill for the AI, if the rad practice is going to buy it, it is improved efficiency. There's secondary values too, that if that practice has a solution that can recruit more rads to that practice, or retain the rads that are there, or sell more services of their practice, then that does have some indirect value. But I think improved efficiency on its own isn't going to scale. So now let's talk about some other stakeholders, the hospital or the healthcare system. What do they care about? Well, they're, of course, right, everyone cares about improved quality, but what are they going to pay for? Well, if they can have decreased cost, your length of stay is decreasing, your ED throughput is increasing. If you have increased revenue in the system with patients coming back, maybe more services for the right patient, ensuring proper follow-up, ensuring more screening for the right patient population, or even identifying chronic conditions that are not otherwise identified to improve, the reimbursement from the Medicare fee schedule. Increased speed to care. We've seen this with stroke imaging, that if you can have an increased speed to care, then something that might have been charged as a medical DRG can become a surgical DRG, and that tends to have a greater input. And it may seem sad to say, like I said, everyone needs quality, but the things that are going to get paid for, since there's no dollars in the system, they have to drive some kind of revenue. And for a payer, I would say that, of course, they care about overall decreased patient care costs. So if you can have, if you can direct savings by not performing follow-up when you shouldn't. We actually did a study, it was probably 3 years ago now, and just for not recommending follow-up for an incidental thyroid nodule when there's no chance of malignancy, zero, based on the papers, you could save $300 million across the US. It's actually significant savings, and payers will pay for that. I think also as we start to move into prediction algorithms, predicting who is more at risk and taking care of those patients before they have complications or before they present with a very significant, expensive problem, if we can predict that in advance and prevent, that's going to be important to payers. So a lot of things depends on who you're talking to, but there's value all the way around.
And I really like that perspective. So you're saying, we have the RAD practices, and they much more care, main thing, efficiency, and then secondary, we have either differentiation with customers or with recruiting, which is another issue. So I think those are kind of indirect, hard to quantify, but also valuable. If you're talking about health system, then the ROI, becomes, from our calculation, is potentially a bit different order of magnitude, because we're now talking length of stay reduction, ED throughput, number of procedures, and that it could then potentially have significant implications downstream. And I love the fact that we're talking about this topic, because it means that to really capture the full value of that, radiologists need to see a much bigger picture. It's not just about why radiologists do better, it's how having better radiology services impacts the downstream, patients, providers, the whole workflow.
That's why we talk about the quadruple aim, right? The quadruple aim is driving value. So it's improved quality or outcomes. It's doing that at a decreased cost. You can't improve outcomes and have it be more expensive. We can't afford that. It's improving the patient experience, improving the physician experience. And I would add on the hospital and client experience, because as a radiologist and a practice, you have multiple clients, and one of them is the hospital. So you think about the quintuple aim, and you have to try to satisfy as many of those as possible. Technology, and especially AI, is one of those areas where you really can. And in that way, it's very unusual and very exciting.
Yeah. And I think that as AI starts taking this broader role, we see in the market, there are a few entrance angles into AI within the organization. It could, come through some of the more, treating specialties like neurosurgery, for example, if we're talking about the stroke, this is neurointerventional, or it could come from radiology, or it could come from a data department. And I'm curious to hear your perspective about what role radiology should take in the AI evolution and AI implementation generally.
Yeah. Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's essential for physicians, I'm going to just start at that level, for physicians to take a really primary role in leading the evolution, whether that's assessing an AI solution, choosing an AI solution, especially deploying, implementing an AI solution within our organizations, because these are clinical tools. You should not be fooled that an IT department can roll this out like you can roll out a PACS upgrade. They're clinical tools that have clinical implications. There is change management that's associated with it. And we found, having deployed multiple of these, that it really takes engaged physicians to get involved. And because we're pretty early in the maturity of AI in general, you need the physicians to make sure you're actually driving to the quintuple or, quadruple aim, because you need to make sure that the physicians involved, that we're taking care of patients. Now, in radiology, I'm clearly biased, right? I'm a radiologist, but I do believe the radiologist is really in an excellent position, maybe even a perfect position, to lead AI within a whole organization. And why do I say that? Well, I say that first because most of the AI developments that have happened so far are in radiology. And that means that we're early adopters about this technology. And early adopters, you get early expertise, early learnings that other people don't have yet. And that's really important when you're talking about a new clinical tool. Second, I'll say that radiology is really at the fulcrum of healthcare. Bill Brody, one of the mentor and radiologist, a mentor of mine and a radiologist, he talked about radiology as being kind of the primary care physician for any patient in the hospital. And why is that? It's because we see the patients throughout the continuum of their care within the hospital. They may transition from a medical patient to a surgical patient, from the ICU to, the floor. We see them whether they're OBGYN or pediatrics, and we see them throughout the entire care spectrum. And that way we get to provide some continuous oversight. And then three, I would say that technically we've always been a very technical group. And we've spent our entire careers understanding how to interpret and utilize new technology. And we've rediscovered this multiple times. So I think the radiologist is in a really good position to be able to bring this new technology that is still evolving into clinical practice in a way that's going to benefit patient care. But we can't do this by sort of sitting in the back seat. We need to be drivers. And I say this of all physicians, this is not going to happen for us. It's really a call to action that we have. And I would encourage all of you guys to learn more about it. Don't be scared of the hype or paralyzed by the fact that there's some negative press out there, because we tend to overhype things in the beginning, and then it takes too long before we really recognize the value. Get involved, get invested now, because you're going to be the driver of this in the future. And we're not going to be replaced. I mean, I will say that very clearly. Rad plus AI, they are absolutely better together. But our job as a radiologist, I believe, is going to fundamentally change. We are going to be accessing far more data. We're going to need to understand when that data is accurate, when to use it, and add context to all of this information we're getting from all of these different locations. So the earlier we start getting involved in that and understanding what that means, the better we are going to be at making that transition.
I think that's a really good point. And to follow up on that, when you say getting involved, so I think some people are kind of looking for the very practical. So what does that mean? How do people get involved?
Yeah, when I first started, so I have a background in applied mathematics, but it was in optimization theory. It was not in statistics. In fact, I'm not good at statistics. I didn't really know much about AI when it first started. And what happened was in my organization, people started asking questions, and I'm like, this is really interesting. I don't know the answer. I'm going to go figure it out. I actually started by going to SIIM, the first annual conference, very early on, and I've been going every year since. I enjoy it, so I spend time learning about it. And that's what I would suggest, right? Don't be afraid. Don't disengage because of hype or fear or something else. Get involved, get invested. What does that mean? Talk to vendors, ask questions. The more questions you ask, the more questions you're going to have. And it's important to do that. It's a process that you go through. I use the analogy of mountain climbing. So you get to the peak, you're like aiming toward a certain peak of where you're going. Once you get to that peak, you're like, yes, I'm here. And suddenly you look up and you realize, oh, there's 5 more peaks beyond me. I never would have known about those 5 peaks if I hadn't gotten to this one. And when you are at the 5th peak, you can look back and provide that information to other people. So follow people on social media who have already sort of mountain climbed those things that you guys haven't seen yet. Go to conferences. Trial a product. These products are, the vendors want you to trial the product. The only way you're really going to know how it works is if you implement it somewhere. Talk to your hospital about buying AI. You might be surprised how interested they really are about buying an AI product. And you as a physician could then be the champion of that as long as you learn about it. Educate your fellow radiologists, your fellow physicians about it, because we really need to be the early adopters of AI today. They're going to be sort of the winners of tomorrow.
I really like that tip of learning, and sometimes you don't even understand, the hills metaphor. You sometimes don't even understand how much there is to build on that layer, right? So we know about AI, but maybe I'll give another example. So Salesforce, those that don't know, they do kind of sales tools automation. They are one of the first cloud software companies in the world. They really pushed software as a service, kind of this new concept of doing cloud-based software, obvious to all of us right now, but that's what they pushed at the time. And it sounded like an obvious concept. Well, we're just doing software on the cloud. What's the big deal? But then we started building on top of that, and there are so many layers and nuances you didn't think about initially. It changes the business models, and then how much you invest in the interaction with the customer, and then how much you build on top of that, the different what implication it has to security and what implication it has about how easy it is to trial. And I kind of feel the same way for AI. You think, well, what's the big deal? You run AI, you get notifications and arrows or boxes about things that happen. But then there are so many layers to how it changes the workflow and how physicians interact with it, and what it means for your trainees, and how it means for administration, how you collect value, and probably you can give 1,000 more examples. But I agree with you. I still learn a ton from each one of our customers' implementations, and really a ton. It's never ending. Like, you constantly iterate and iterate, and that's the beauty, I think, of AI right now. We're still in this phase where everything is fresh and new, and it's just so easy to innovate and take an active role that makes our job really fun, I would say.
And you might be surprised. You might be surprised. You might think, okay, I'm deploying a CAD triage model, for instance. And I had this conversation with a radiologist a few years ago at RSNA. We're like, CAD T, all it does is move a study up on the work list. And we're getting all our studies within 30 minutes anyway, if they're important. And the amount of, pathology and outpatient imaging is not really that big. It has some value. It's not that it doesn't have value, but like, is that the be all end all? And then I'm like, well, I happen to know that I piloted a few CAD-T products, and I found that there were other benefits that you would never have expected. I expected to get to the study faster, right? Like it moves up in the work list, and so you actually get to the exam faster. But there were a bunch of things that we found in piloting that I actually didn't expect. So number one, we found that the radiologist was more efficient at reading exams. Not only did they get to the exam faster, but they read that exam faster. And I was like, well, why would that be? Most cases are negative. The incidence of intracranial hemorrhage or PE, for instance, it's like 5 or 7%. So the vast majority of cases that you're getting are negative. So if you're improving your efficiency, it's because you're doing it on the negative studies, because they vastly outweigh the number of positives. And if your negative predictive value is high enough, if your specificity of that algorithm is high enough, what we found was that the radiologists started really trusting. They understood, hey, I've seen this AI, I'm working cohesively with it, kind of like as you drive a Tesla, you know where it works well, you know where it doesn't, and together you're driving really well. The radiologists had that confidence that they could go faster instead of perseverating on something and looking for something really subtle. They know they kind of had a cybernetic buddy that was assisting them in the background. And that was something we didn't expect. We did, I suppose, suspect that it would find some things we missed, right? The sensitivity is also higher. And we found for intracranial hemorrhage, it picked up, I think, 2.4% more intracranial hemorrhage exams than we found ourselves. And for PE, it was 4.4%. And if you look for incidental PE, where you're not even looking for PE, it is much, much higher because the radiologist isn't looking at that. And so that's an additional benefit from a CAD-T product. And the last thing, I will say too, all of the findings that the triage picked up were very subtle. And so you might ask the question, well, is that actually going to improve outcomes? And what if we're just adding more cost to the system because you're treating patients that have such subtle findings that you're just putting them more at risk, or you're putting them in the hospital when they shouldn't be? And while we're already gathering evidence, we have anecdotal evidence to show that's not the case. There were some super subtle findings that people missed. I almost was like, is that real? Is it not? That came back. And their intracranial hemorrhage grew significantly, enough for them to require a craniotomy. And it's not just because they were on Coumadin. So it is finding things that are clearly significant, and it's adding sensitivity to the radiologist. And then the last thing, as another benefit of this was that our rads loved using it. We did a pilot, and at the end of the 6 months, the rads were like, "You're not going to take this away, are you?" And we're like, "Well, we were, but I guess we won't." So and you really need that. You need to have to develop that into your workflow.
Yeah, I agree. That last point I think is crucial. It's about, when you think about AI, there are so many different stakeholders, right? And you want to make sure that the value is clear for each of them. But for rads themselves, they just want software that they love, right? So yes, it helps them improve quality, but I think for them, it's, maybe you tell me, but I think a lot of it is around maybe sense of confidence, some efficiency. Obviously, they care as well, right? That's many that are RVU driven, but even the sense of confidence, the calm, that you don't have, if we're talking CAT-T, for example, you don't have maybe something, quietly waiting for, with an urgent finding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it decreased burnout. I mean, and that is one of the things why they went from the triple aim to the quadruple aim, because we realized that physicians were getting more and more burnt out. And there's a point at which if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. And so it is important and not selfish for physicians to think about that as well. And we did notice that there was less burnout in our physicians using a product that was assisting them. And I think we'll start to see more and more of that. I mean, whether it is CAD-T or whether it is something else, that AI can significantly help in reducing burnout because it can improve the radiology workflow. It can automate things that previously weren't automated. And why? Well, because AI, if I had to summarize what AI was really good at, I would say AI is great at sort of adding structure to unstructured data. Whereas previously, in order to know it was in an image, you needed a physician to look at it, or to know what's in a report, you needed a physician to look at it. Now you can use an AI tool that adds structure to that data. And with that structure, you can drive different workflows that automate things that we're doing really manually right now.
Yeah. And on another topic, and you might you touched on this, but maybe you have something to add regarding downstream impact and research. So one of the things that I find fascinating with AI, one of the biggest challenges I hear from radiology, is very hard to measure the impact of better radiology quality, right? Why are you, doing some specialty reads? Why do we have, attending at night? Why are we doing all of this? It's difficult to measure the impact of that. How does it impact care at the end of the day? I think what's really cool about AI is you have like a delta in time where you have this spike in potential quality. It could be in turnaround time or on, finding more relevant cases. And then you can measure the potential impact of that. So anything you know about the potential impact of AI implementations?
Yeah, we're very specific about that. When you're early on and you have to prove the value of a product, you can't do that by just saying, hey, I'm better quality, or hey, this product is better quality, right? If there's no scorecard, if there's no grades, everyone's an A student. And that's what we were in radiology for a very long time. Everyone's like, yeah, we're the best. No, we're the best. And that was just because people are raising their hand and using sort of operational metrics, if anything. And now we're starting to have metrics that I would say are more accurate, or a better assessment of true quality. And we measure these very specifically. And I would encourage any group that is working with AI to make sure that they are measuring it. We do it with every pilot that we run, and we do it with every implementation, so that we can show that there really is the value with our patient population. And the general things that we look at Number one, we look at the ROI for all of the stakeholders, and that's going to depend on what the algorithm is. And we talked about a few of those for CAD-T. Second, we look at the accuracy of the model in our environment, which we know may not be the accuracy that is advertised, because every model is going to work on what it was trained on. And if my data is different, we may have a different accuracy level. And that's something that you have to validate over time, because you can't assume that your data is going to stay stable. Right now, the way that the FDA clears an algorithm or a model, that model has to stay stable, but your data may not. And so you have to measure that over time, not just in your pilot, but as you implement and after you implement. The third thing we look at is the performance of the tool. When you think about this, these are not going to be standalone solutions. You're not just going to be, it's not a one and done. Like, I'm going to implement one AI model and I'm good to go. No, you're going to have a lot, and you're going to hopefully scale your group. So does the model and does the performance of the model scale with you? Then we always look at, for us, we're a radiology practice, so we always look at radiologist satisfaction, and we measure that in a couple ways. We use an NPS score, which is a very simple assessment of, hey, would you recommend this tool to a colleague? And it's a 0 to 10 score, and we look at the results of that, and then have RADs have comments also, because those comments are really helpful. And then the last thing that we look at as a practice is we always do measure efficiency. Does it change the efficiency of the radiologist? I don't think that's the be all end all, but frankly, we don't have enough RADs for the amount of work that there is. And we're all struggling as the volume increases, our radiologist number is not increasing. And so any way we can use technology to improve our efficiency without increasing burnout, which actually decreasing it, is really important. And so that's something that we should measure. It's a KPI. And I would suggest that everyone does that, not only in their pilots, but also on any rollout.
Yeah. Yeah, I like measuring the soft KPIs, creating some structure to soft KPIs. I think it's important. It's not as quantifiable, but I think it's still important to look at, because oftentimes those are the things that matter the most, even though hard to measure.
And
so
there's another bit that I didn't even mention, because I found this to be really interesting, and I want to mention it just because I think it's so important. Part of this experience is about education. We need to educate our radiologists. And we found that when we first rolled out our CAD-T product and it was picking up stuff that the RADs are missing, we're like, okay, let's have a peer learning conference and we'll go through all of those things to make the radiologist better, right? And that's important to do, right? When I first came out of residency, I went and straight into a teleradiology position. 100% of my exams were overread. I learned so much in that first year by just seeing what I was wrong at. And if we have the ability to use this as a peer learning tool, I think you really need to do that. The second thing that and maybe more importantly, is teaching the radiologists about where the AI is wrong, where these tools have to work together. You can, as humans, we have an automation bias where we just tend to trust an automated system, sometimes more than our own intuition, right? It's why when GPS came out, people were turning the wrong way down one-way streets and driving into parked cars, and like, oh, well, the GPS told me to go there. We have to be very careful when it's a clinical situation. And the thing that I think helps solve that is education. If you use AI for education and peer learning, it's an area that's not tapped. And Ariella, if you want, you can put up some of the slides that we have about peer learning, because I think it doesn't really hit you until you actually see it. And once that starts coming up, I'll go through maybe one example of just how it can affect some of the things in peer learning. So if you go to the slide, keep going to okay, chest X-ray. All right, so I'm just going to give you a visual example. So we know just on literature that we as radiologists, we make mistakes, and that error rate for reading a chest X-ray, now they're not all hugely significant, but the error rate is about 20%. So if you click to the next slide, if you have this many chest X-rays, 190 chest X-rays, click again, the error rate being 20%, that means that we're going to have 38 chest X-ray errors. Again, not all significant, but there will be 38 chest X-ray errors. That's 38 opportunities for learning. The way that we do peer learning right now is we do random 3%, maybe 5%, but let's say you do 3% if you go to the next slide. So if you do 3%, that means out of the 190 cases, you're going to review 6 of them. And so if you click to the next slide, as you click again, you randomly picking 6 out of here, only one of them, statistically, only one of them is going to intersect with the one pathology. So out of the 36 or 38 potential areas for learning, you had one learning experience. And in fact, the way that we work now, since the peer review is used against us, we may disregard that case and open up another one. So you may end up having none. And it's a real shame because we as radiologists don't get the benefit of learning. If you click through a couple more times, we'll skip. Oh, here we go. So yeah, here's the one case out of the 38. It's just visually very amazing to me that the way that we're trying to learn is by finding information from that one case when there's 37 others that we could learn from. And so if you click a little bit ahead, we're going to skip the 5%. 5%, if you click through that, it's really just click again and again another time. So if you do 5% cases, you'll pick up 10 and you'll review 10 cases, and within that, you'll find 2 errors. So again, click again. 2 errors is not enough out of 38. But now let's think about using artificial intelligence to do peer review for us or peer learning. AI can look at 100% of the cases. Even retrospectively, we can go back and look at 100% for these findings. So out of your 190 chest X-rays, click again, we've got our 38 that are potential abnormalities. If you have a 95% sensitivity, which is around where AI is, click again. Out of 95%, how many of those are going to be learning lessons? 36 learning lessons, 36 out of 38, as opposed to 1, 2, or maybe even 0. And these are all things that we can use to learn from. We've also found that when we have AI do peer review with the radiologist, it's a little less, the rad just doesn't feel that tension because another rad is pointing the finger at them and saying, oh, you missed something. There's an AI solution that's educating them. So I think there's a real benefit and potential for artificial intelligence to be used in peer learning.
I love that. Actually, the visual really make it pop. So I really enjoyed seeing that. So I think we need in 2 minutes maybe to pause for questions. But Nina, any parting thoughts to end before we go to the questions?
I hope that people are starting to, I know that people are over the hype, or at least anyone that is following AI, that we're over the hype. I hope that people are starting to get invested and get involved because this is really exciting for us. We are in a consolidation phase where I think that that we will start to see less vendors and some winners that start to come out. What tends to happen naturally is that we overestimate the negativity of that. We're like, oh, we can't make a decision because we don't know which AI vendor is going to be there in the end, or we're starting to hear some negative press about AI, so it's all going to be bad, or there's multiple difficulties in deploying it, so I'm just not going to get involved and get invested. I really feel like this is an important part of our future. And I just recommend to people not to overhype, not to overfear, if that is a word, to expand on what people are saying, because this is going to have a huge role in our future and it does provide a significant value. And I recommend getting invested early so that the early adopters, again, can be the ones that are going to have the knowledge in the end.
Amazing. Good. So Ariel, I'll let you moderate the questions.
Thank you, Nina. That was amazing, and thank you both. It was a great discussion. So I've asked the attendees; they are all on mute. So I've asked them to start sending over questions. We only have 10 minutes, and so one of the questions you touched upon this, but maybe from a lessons learned perspective on implementation, like what would you say the lessons that you learned, at least from implementing AI, and is there sort of some best practices that you'd like to share with the audience?
I think people underestimate the deployment or implementation component of it. They think, oh, we can just buy the AI and it's kind of one and done. And the technical implementation is not necessarily the hard part. I think a lot of AI vendors have done a huge amount of work to make the technical implementation more seamless. And it's more about the clinical implementation. Again, these are clinical tools. And with that, you have to treat them as such. And you need really engaged physicians. What we found when we've rolled out these tools is that it's essential to have what I'll call a sort of physician leader that is actively engaging with their local radiologists and talking about that tool. A physician leader who really serves as the champion for that tool. And that needs to be a local physician. We have a large organization, so we do a lot of things centrally. But if I'm central and I say, okay, rad group over here, you're going to love the tool because of X, Y, and Z. Well, I'm not the person that they trust, right? The person they trust are the people that they work with. So it's really important to have a physician leader who locally can serve as a physician champion. That's number one. Number two, I'd suggest that it is essential for to make sure you have a way where radiologists can provide feedback. These tools are new, there's stuff that's not working, there's stuff that's working really well, and you want to improve the process. In order to do that, you need to have feedback, and RADs don't provide feedback unless it's a part of their workflow. So make it really easy for the physician to provide feedback, and when the physician provides feedback, do something about it. Get back to them, let them know that you heard that feedback and you're making changes. The third part I'd say is that it's really essential to measure who's using these tools. And we've rolled out AI tools to, 1,000 radiologists about. And what you'll find is that they get really excited and RADs want to use it. And I mean, there's always going to be some maybe that don't, and you can convince them. But when you look at who's actually using it, it could be very different. And you're not going to know that unless you have a way of measuring RAD engagement. You have to have that metric so that you can provide that to your local practice so that the local practice can do something about it. And without measurement, I mean, it's a classic part of change management. You have to provide that feedback. And then the last part is really about what I was talking about with education and education, whether that's peer learning conferences, we're figuring out where RADs are making errors or where the AI system is making errors. In order for us to learn to work together, we have to actively educate each other about how these systems work.
Thank you, Nina. Don Dennison is thanking you guys for a great talk, and he's saying, if AI can be used for peer review, even as stated retrospectively, why not use AI to review volumes of historic data, imaging exams for missed findings? Would concerns about risk exposure prevent this?
Yes, and we've seen both depending on our hospital client, because we have a way of using NLP and AI to go back and sort of extract missed follow-up, right? Because we know that we might recommend the perfect follow-up, even if it's the right thing to do. It's very hard for that follow-up to get enacted the way that we put it in a report. And so we've gone back and said, all right, well, let's find all of the missed follow-up. Well, if you have a missed follow-up for AAA or for a lung nodule that may turn malignant, how much does that hospital really want to know? And we've actually found it's different depending on the hospital. Some are like, yes, go back to the past 6 months, go back a year. We want to collect all those patients and make sure that we're seeing them and pulling them into our system. Some are like, it's a little bit scary. Maybe you don't, maybe it's better not to know. And that really, I'm not saying one's right or wrong, but it's just going to depend on the hospital client and what they're comfortable with.
And I guess one more question. We've had this question about, I guess, residents and their interest in AI, and to hear maybe about new recruits, right, to like a RAD practice. Is this, I'm coming in and out. Is this something that comes up in maybe in an interview process even, right? Do you use AI? Is this an incentive to join, do you think, a practice, given that they have AI?
Yes. So I started one of the local practices within my group, and because I started it, I did a lot of the recruiting in the beginning, and so I have experience with this. I would always mention it at the beginning. Other rads weren't asking about it. I've been doing this for years. So in the beginning, I was mentioning it, and they're like, "Ooh, that's cool! Really, you have that? That seems really cool." And it was definitely something that engaged them and made them want to join our practice because we were being innovative and forward thinking. And I think if you're using AI, you can use that as a recruiting tool. Are rads starting to ask about it? Now rads are starting to ask about it. It's not as common as maybe they're going to ask what your workflow is like, because it's not fully integrated yet. They're not seeing it everywhere, but I'm starting to see some radiologists asking, what kind of artificial intelligence are you using? And that's a great thing. That means that we're starting to get to the point where AI is becoming more mature and more integrated into our solutions, which is where I think it should be.
So I guess one last question. We sort of have 4 more minutes. So you were sharing some slides about your future thoughts about AI, and maybe that sort of connects to that. Like, what are your thoughts? When is this going to become standard of care? I can show those cool slides if you want.
I have made a few cheesy slides, taking them from different.
I'm going to share them because I think they're worth sharing.
Okay, you guys can all laugh at me, but I do think that that AI is going to do a few things for us in the future, and it's not just AI; it's overall data in general. I do believe our role as radiologists is going to fundamentally change, and we're used to that, right? When MRI came out, we had to learn a completely new modality and understand how it worked, and changed how we read things and incorporate that into what we do. So I think we're able to do this. So this is from Minority Report, and it's me who made it, so it's like really kind of cheesy. But the idea, not that we're going to have a huge giant screen, is that we're going to have a huge amount of data that's coming to us, whether that is information from an AI system telling us about what's in the exam, what the quality of the exam. Maybe it's molecular imaging data that's coming across. Maybe it's radiomics, and we're getting data about the underlying malignancy or disease that the patient has. All of this data is going to be overwhelming, and we're going to need a way to understand and interpret it. And on the top of that, it's not always going to be right. Right? There's no AI system, there's no technology, no computer system that's right 100% of the time. So we know plus a RAD plus AI is better together, better than either alone. We're going to need both of those. And I think the radiologist is going to be, instead of the master of imaging, is going to be more of a master of information. And a lot of that will come from imaging, but we're going to have to be adding the context to the imaging results, the radiomic data, the other omics that we're getting, including genomics, so that we can provide a consult to our referring clinician and even to our patient about what that means for them and what is the next step. It's really exciting to me because when I went into radiology, they had PACS the first year I was a resident. And I went into radiology because when I was a med student, everyone came into the reading room, and there was such great contextual information passed back and forth between the clinicians. And then when I went to residency, that was gone. Like, technology kind of took that away. And there's great things about PACS, but that wasn't one of them. I think this technology has the ability to bring us closer to our physicians, to get back to that point where we were providing the value and being the physician's physician, and doing the same even with the patient.
Thank you so much, Nina. So any parting thoughts before we let everyone go? You've been an amazing audience, and thank you for joining us. Any parting thoughts from either of you?
Elad, I'll let you go first.
I'll just say on the vendor side that I really appreciate what Nina said. It's not AI. It's not something you download in an app store and kind of install, and then everything works amazingly. A lot of it is change management, and the clinical integration, I think, is really key. So making sure that you become involved, I think what we see the most successful implementations and where the most value for the health system, and it can be very significant value is when RADs become involved in part of the process. That's, where we get excited as well. So that would be my kind of recommendation.
I will echo that. You don't partner with an algorithm or a model, you partner with people. Find a vendor that has the same values that you do and the same mission. Find a vendor that you can work closely with, because that's what's needed at this point.
Thank you so much, both of you. It was a great session. I enjoyed it very much. And so we'll say goodbye to everyone. I think, Nina, you've still got another session today, so good luck with that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and speak soon again. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.